All right, thanks, Nellie. My name's James Pepper. I'm the chair of the Cannabis Control Board in Vermont. Today is October 25th, 2023. It's 1 o'clock, and I call this meeting to order. A few quick remarks before we get going. We held the second of our Act 65 working group meetings about the medical program. The primary focus of this meeting was around which condition should qualify a patient for access to the medical registry. We reviewed some of the most common qualifying conditions in the 38 medical use states around the country. We also examined some of the various processes that other states have adopted for adding new qualifying conditions that don't necessarily rely on a purely legislative approval process or kind of advocacy. We took a deep dive into the Minnesota model, which relies on a petition process, independent review from a board of experts, and then ultimate approval authority by the Commissioner of Health. In that meeting, we also heard about the general state of the scientific evidence related to the potential therapeutic effects of cannabinoids and terpenes. We heard about programs that might be able to provide continuing medical education about cannabis to healthcare providers. And then we also heard from Jessie Lynn Dolan about the Cannabis Nurses Hotline, which is providing general information to patients and adults that are curious about using cannabis for symptom relief. You can watch the recording of this meeting as well as our first one on our YouTube channel. The third of 4 meetings will focus on the active compounds that are naturally occurring in cannabis and their potential therapeutic effects. We're also going to look at more general ways to increase access and affordability for medical patients. We've not yet set a date for this third meeting, but we will keep our events calendar up to date, and the link to join and the agenda will appear in there. We do encourage anyone who's interested in the medical program to attend that meeting if possible, but also just anytime you want to share your thoughts about ways to improve the medical program, you can email us at ccb.med, that's MED, at vermont.gov. Also want to note that we've developed a patient survey for this year that is going to go out hopefully by the end of the week to the email address that we have for all patients and caregivers on file. So keep an eye out for that. It's got some really important questions in there that we'd love to get people's feedback on. Moving on, employee ID cards. With everything, all the harvesting and curing and packaging that's happening right now, I think it's a good time to remind all of our licensees that anyone who's coming onto your property, your cannabis establishment, that's going to be plant touching needs to have an employee ID card issued by the CCB, and that it's your responsibility as the license holder to ensure that this requirement is being met. And when I say your responsibility, I mean that it's your license that might get penalized if we find that you're using employees that don't have an employee ID card. This includes people working on mobile trim units, anyone who's, potentially transporting cannabis on your behalf, family members that are coming over on the weekends to help you package. It's important to make sure that all of these folks are kind of been through our process and have an employee ID. That's the only updates that I have. We got a lot to get through on the agenda. So why don't we approve our minutes from our last meeting on September 27th before we turn to the agenda? You guys had a chance to review those? Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All abstaining?
I'll abstain, Mr. Chair. I was not here.
Okay. Great. So that it was 2-0-1, Nellie, for the record. All right. why don't we move to the agenda? I think first on our agenda is a discussion about the possible closure of cultivation tiers. So I think, this conversation is largely going to be redundant for Julie and Kyle. We've been through this before. I think, both in setting up our initial market structure and in our decision to close tier 5. But I think it's important just for us to kind of have this conversation on the record, just to help better inform kind of where we're all coming from for our kind of current and prospective licensees, but also for any future cannabis board members, kind of hearing how we decided made this decision. For me, I'll just start and then just open it up for conversation. I see a number of competing principles at play. Certainly, our job is to, create a structure that supplies the demand for regulated cannabis in the state. We also need to shift consumers towards regulated products. That's one of our goals. We want to provide points of entry to this market for legacy operators. We want to provide opportunity for growth of the kind of successful operators that get licensed. And, I also think we have a responsibility to the extent that we can to avoid this sort of economic protectionism and allow the free market to drive quality and reward quality. Of course, this is not a free market in the traditional sense. There's not the same access to capital or the sort of economic safety nets that exist for traditional businesses. We all know about the increased costs for kind of basic banking services and insurance. We know that there's no bank loans, there's no lines of credit, there's no federal tax write-offs, and there's no bankruptcy protection, meaning that when people kind of crash out of this market, it's a lot more personally damaging than probably any other industry. And, cutting again in favor of the side of somewhat economic protectionism, I suppose, is we were also, under the legislative intent, asked to support small farmers and social equity applicants. And we have a real duty to make sure that this supply chain, which is an intra-state supply chain, is managed in a way that achieves some of that legislative intent. So, turning to our economic model, I think the demand estimates that are contained in there are actually turning out to be pretty accurate. Those could change depending on certain decisions that the legislature makes around tax rates, special events, delivery, social consumption, THC caps, and probably a dozen or so other factors that are outside of our control. But for now, I do think that the kind of demand side of things is pretty accurate. But I also think there's a few points that are not readily apparent if you just blindly follow the model and compare that to our licensing numbers. First, the canopy targets that are in that report assume that because of our short growing season, a lot of cultivation would be happening indoor. That assumption really did not materialize to the degree that it was pre-assumed. And so the canopy goals do need to be adjusted to accommodate the differences in indoor and outdoor harvest cycles. Second, our target was for flowering canopy, but the statutory definition of canopy for the purposes of our cultivation tiers includes all areas dedicated to plant production, meaning that no one is going to be able to utilize the full allowable canopy of their license for flowering plants. We are in our site visits starting to drill down on this question of how much a licensee's allotted canopy is being used for flowering plants versus things like aisles in between rows or bedrooms or, maintaining genetics or just not being utilized at all. And our inventory tracking is helping us kind of figure out just kind of how much flowering canopy we actually have in the state. And then also, I think one thing that's kind of somewhat interesting is coming out of Oklahoma is there's this growing body of research that a sustainable market should supply should oversupply to a moderate degree. You know, we're seeing somewhere in the range of 1.3 up to maybe even 2 grams of cannabis should be supplied for every 1 gram of demand. And this moderate oversupply helps prevent there being an undersupply if there's a particularly wet summer and fall, if there's kind of widespread disease, fungus, and also just to allow unsuccessful businesses to exit the market. Our modeling was, I believe, attempting to be an accurate reflection of the demand and didn't build any of this kind of moderate oversupply need into its targets. So I'm just going to next turn to the numbers, because this is obviously the thing that kind of is driving my thinking is, if you assume, I'm looking at the amount of canopy we've issued, including, and just because it's part of the assumptions is that each integrated license is allowed 15,000 square feet of indoor canopy if they want to use it. I don't think any of them are, but they're allowed that. And you assume 4 turns a year for indoor versus 1 for outdoor. And, I know people have different assumptions there. But, if you just look at the amount of canopy licensed, we have exceeded the demand model target at a purely 1-to-1 ratio, as in 1 gram of supply for 1 gram of demand. We're more at a kind of 1.2 to 1. But then when you factor in the actual utilization rates we're seeing in reality, we're still short of our demand targets, both at the kind of 1-to-1 ratio or anything greater. We also still don't quite know how yields are going to look this year in the outdoor harvest. How that shapes up could potentially exacerbate an undersupply problem, probably not in the immediate term, but, maybe, in the summer, next summer. But that being said, I do think this is a good time to kind of open it up, Julie, to you and Kyle to talk about, this question that we've been asked to think about around whether we need any new Tier 4 cultivators indoors or potentially outdoors as well.
I think I looked at some of the same things you did, Pepper, in terms of looking at the data that we've gotten so far from NCS. I know that we're still kind of building the quality of that data, and that'll build over time. And then I looked at the report from last month, the ED's report from last night in terms of capacity versus utilization. And, there's a lot of room for growth in the current licensees. And, we've only got 1 year under our belts to understand like how much can be produced. In that first year, people aren't necessarily going to fill all their space or grow all their plants. They're still going to be testing out cultivars and things like that. But it does look like the production is quite good. Like the amount that's being produced from those licensees is quite good. But one question I had in sort of my own calculus is how many of cultivation licenses do we have like in the queue? And this would be probably a question for you, Bryn. Like how many more do we have that are, not up for licensure this month, but are sort of moving towards that? That might put us in a place where we're way over, utilization and capacity.
So I do have those numbers in the executive director report this month.
Okay.
So you guys will be able to take a look at them soon. I would say that we are sort of on track, like the proportion of cultivators that are renewing is pretty consistent with the proportion of issued cultivation licenses that we have. So people are renewing pretty regularly. And in the executive director report, I also have a list of our confirmed non-renewals. So that list is above 20 at this point. The majority are cultivation licensees. But I would say on the whole, people tend to be renewing as opposed to not renewing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I agree with, it's hard to say much more. Julie and James, you've said everything that I've been kind of mulling over as we were asked to kind of, think about this. I think, just to Julie's point, recognizing where we are and folks haven't utilized their full existing capacity as we kind of all figure out and fine tune things working towards renewal and into the future. Combining that with the chair's comments around subtle oversupply, leads me to think that we're in a roughly good spot in a place to kind of start making decisions like this. And just, for historical context, as we were developing these tiers, recognizing that our market was going to be on the whole a lot smaller than any other market. Our bigger tiers are still small tiers in other states. And I think, I still think we were correct in understanding that we needed all of these tier options at the onset. We didn't know who was going to participate in the legal market. We didn't know who was interested from the legacy market coming into our legal market. And if they looked around the country, what tier size would be right for them to start at. And I think to more of the chair's points, a lot of them have been in the outdoor category and started smaller. And I'd rather personally allow those folks to find their footing and graduate from a business perspective than continuously licensing larger tiers. So, again, I think we all kind of knew that we would be making decisions annually, at least about closing specific tiers. I think we even recognized we didn't need the biggest tier to begin with, but I think that context is really important, that we didn't know what kind of business interest we would get. And I think we have a year under our belt in understanding where that business interest is, where the sweet spot is for a lot of folks that are operating in this legal community. And I think that's really helped to drive some of my thoughts behind this, and recognizing, I've heard some qualitative information that some of the smaller growers are starting to struggle to find somebody to buy their product at a price point that works for them, especially if it's under a certain tier or a certain THC percentage. Even if it is otherwise a high quality product, that THC percentage, regardless of how we all feel and understand that should be one deciding factor in the purchase of a cannabis product, that's still driving a lot of demand and decision making by retailers as they onboard certain cultivators into their stores. So, I think we want to help the folks that have taken that leap of faith with us, and recognize that I want them to be able to grow and succeed and utilize their full capacity and their full canopy without somebody coming in and cutting them off at the knees.
Yeah, Kyle, one thing you said is something that was going to be just one final point that I wanted to talk about. Is one thing, like I want to avoid for lack of a better term, the Oregon or Oklahoma problem, where they're growing 32 grams of cannabis for every 1 gram of demand in Oklahoma, and Oregon, and they put a moratorium on all new cultivation licenses. Oregon, same deal. I always want to keep at least tier 1 open, probably tier 1 through 3 open. But I also think that in order to kind of give successful operators that have proven their success room to expand if need be, my goal is to shut down tier 4 to new applicants, but maybe work in rule over the next year to kind of chart a path for people that are successful at tier 3 to be able to move up or have some additional capacity. I think that's one area where we're not trying to just totally say you can you just think about like the craft beer industry. Like if it was capped, if your production was capped the way cannabis is, we probably wouldn't see some of these kind of businesses being able to compete at a larger scale. But anyway, I think
I'm with you, and I think there's a couple states that we can look towards that kind of have that kind of graduation from tier to tier kind of approach. Yeah. I know that there's at least some other ones in New England, and I'm sure there's some elsewhere. And again, I'd rather, the thing with closing tiers is we can always reopen tiers if we decide that we truly need to. But I think that slight oversupply versus falling into the trappings that so many other states do, whether it's Oregon or California or a lot of the more mature markets, and having to put that moratorium on all licensing, I think that could not be helpful to the Vermont grow cultivation community as we look towards in the future, federal legalization, being able to still have a presence.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Pepper and Kyle. What you said that made me think about this too, Pepper, was about we haven't seen anyone really take advantage of like a co-oping model where they might have 3 or 4 separate businesses but want to share resources. And if we can through rule work out a way where people can continue to explore those avenues without maybe having, a separate tier 4 license, that I would agree with. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think the motion that I'd like to see, if we're in agreement, or if there's no more discussion on this, would be about closing tier 4 to new applicants for the indefinitely. We might decide to open it, but unlike our kind of seasonal closure, not put a time frame for when it's going to reopen. And I think what our historically we've done is kick that out for 1 month, so 30 days from today, if the vote is successful. And I think we should limit it to indoor right now, but I'm happy to have the conversation about outdoor as well. I mean, I know those are closed currently, and I don't think we have to, I don't think we have to deal with it necessarily at this meeting, because of what are they open again on December 1st, spring? So there will be one more meeting before that reopening that we could discuss that, unless you guys want to talk about it now.
I think the question you're asking, Pepper, is do we want to, when we reopen or when those licenses reopen, I should make sure I understand where we're going with the conversation. Do we also open 4 and 5, or do we just open 1 through 3? Okay.
Yeah, on the outdoor and mixed side.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to have that conversation now, or do you want to postpone until the next meeting? I mean, I know we kind of I talked to you about thinking about this from the indoor perspective. I don't know if anyone feels that outdoor should deserve the same kind of treatment as indoor with respect to this kind of supply and demand conversation.
I would be comfortable having that conversation now. I think I kind of think the same way about it. I mean, there's still, even with our outdoor, the licenses that we have still have room to grow in terms of canopy capacity. So, if we left 4 and 5 closed, and knowing that there's probably going to be plenty of, or I assume that there's going to be plenty of tier 1s coming new into the market, right? Second year, people who's watched last year will come in the second year. I don't know what the demand for those licenses are, but my assumption is people will be ready. If they weren't ready last year, they'll be ready this year. So, I'd be comfortable talking about not reopening 4 and 5, either now or at our next meeting, whichever makes most sense.
Well, I'm happy. I mean, my opinion doesn't change all that much. Obviously we want to encourage outdoor cultivation, but the same principles, underlying or the same rationale is true for outdoor. We don't have a huge amount of more capacity on the supply side. We have some, we don't have a ton. And it seems to me like, I would be comfortable closing 4 and 5, or not reopening, I should say, 4 and 5 on the outdoor as well. But, yeah, I mean, and we're seeing greater utilization of flowering canopy on the outdoor side. It seems like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think procedurally. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think procedurally these are 2 separate. Ultimately, if we take the votes, they're 2 separate votes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think I'm right there with the 2 of you. I think what I'd like us to do and think about is if a vote does go through with closing tier 4 and 5, at least putting a pin in the conversation if we look to amend our rules moving forward that would allow existing licensees under a certain set of conditions, if they so want to, dump the tier if they've demonstrated success in any number of different factors that we can talk about in the future and put out for public comment on what those factors should be and look like. I think everybody should be thinking starting at one of these smaller tiers, but as you kind of alluded to, Mr. Chair, at the beginning, limiting the economic growth and understanding where businesses might want to get to over the course of 3 to 5 years, I think is something that we shouldn't dismiss altogether.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of states I feel like do this in the opposite way. Whereas, like, if you are a tier 4 and you've only, used half of your capacity, then they make you drop down a tier.
I think
so that
I think Massachusetts does that, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
we do.
and I prefer to do it the opposite way, is where you start small and you get to graduate to a tier that wouldn't otherwise be open. So yeah, I think we can look to kind of the performance measures that Massachusetts looks at when they're thinking about clawing back canopy, unused canopy, and try and use that maybe as a benchmark for allowing, tier 3s to go up.
And maybe some tier 3s wouldn't want that opportunity. I'm sure there's at least 1 or 2 that have thought about it, right? So it's just kind of making sure we're not completely closed-minded to that thought process. I think moving forward is where I'm at least on October 25th, 2023.
Okay. Bryn, are you hearing anything that we're missing?
Nope, I think this is very well reasoned and driven by the data that you're looking at month to month. So I don't think you're missing anything.
Okay. All right. Well, does anyone have a motion on the indoor tier 4 question?
As a matter of fact, I do. Based on the board's authority to open and close acceptance periods for applications as set out in Rule 1.10, I move that the board closes indefinitely the application window for new Tier 4 indoor cultivation license applications beginning at the end of the business day, Friday, November 24th, 2023.
All right. Is there a second?
A second.
Any further discussion on this? I guess my only question before we vote is, Bryn, I think this is doable from a technology perspective. I mean, we've now closed tiers multiple times.
Yes, this is doable in that time frame for our platform.
Okay, great. All right. Well, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks for that conversation. Do we want to talk about the outdoor 4 and 5 anymore, or is there a motion for that?
I don't think I need any more conversation, Kyle, unless you do.
Nope. I'm ready.
I do have a motion. I am comfortable with that.
Okay.
Based on the board's authority to open and close acceptance periods for applications as set out in Rule 1.10, I move that the board hold closed indefinitely the application window for tiers 4 and 5 outdoor and mixed cultivation licenses.
I will second.
Great. And any final thoughts, discussion? No. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Let's see what's next. So next is our continued discussion around ISO lab accreditation. Julie, I'm sure you listened to Luke Emerson from BIA Diagnostics at the last meeting. I think we have a guest or two that actually do the accreditation that have joined us. Is that right, Bryn?
Yes, it is. You have Chris Fox-Strauss, who is here to join you, who I think is planning on giving you some more information about what accreditation entails.
All right.
Hello,
Chris.
Yes. Are you able to? Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's see if I can get my camera working too. Perfect. Hello. Good afternoon. So my name is Christopher Fox-Strauss. I'm an accreditation manager with ANAB, ANSI National Accreditation Board. I've also asked my colleague Warren Merkel, I don't know if he has speaking permissions to join as well today. So I don't know, Warren, if you're able to speak and introduce yourself. If not, I can just carry forward.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Chris. Warren Merkel. I'm the Vice President for Policy at ANAB.
Fantastic. And from my understanding from Bryn's contact me, you're interested in learning a bit more about ISO 17025 requirements for laboratories.
Yes.
So
right.
if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to take those, or I can kind of provide an overview of it.
I think an overview initially, and then if you're all right with it, if questions come up during that presentation, we can maybe raise our hand or pause you. But I certainly have some for when it's over. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So I'll kind of do a broad overview right now. So ISO 17025 is an international standard that covers testing and calibration laboratories. The purpose of the standard is to attest to the lab's competency to impartially perform a defined set of tests. So accreditation to ISO 17025 is granted by an impartial third-party accreditation body, which, like, is ANAB, who annually reviews the lab's conformity to the ISO standard, and at minimum once every other year goes on site to the laboratory to witness the testing being performed, the equipment in the laboratory, the environmental conditions, as well as a review of the quality system. So the kind of main elements to 17025, it's a fairly long technical standard, but I kind of broke it down into a few key areas that labs are required to conform to in order to be accredited to the standard year over year. So the main portion is a quality system. So that includes your standard operating procedures, your policies, your training manuals and logs, your impartiality and confidentiality requirements. And that quality system is reviewed annually. Another major portion of the standard is the requirement to ensure the validity of results. So that is done both by various means of internal systems checks, but is always required to have proficiency testing. I don't know how familiar everyone here is with proficiency testing, but that is an interlaboratory test which is managed by an accredited third-party organization. And that third-party group, called a proficiency test provider, compares the results across all of the labs in the study. And they detect outlying test results, so be that for cannabinoids or terpenes, whatever your specific test you're looking for is. And they provide those results anonymously across the lab, so you can see as yourself as a laboratory where you compare in your results to other laboratories. And then if you are multiple standard deviations outside of the normal range, it is considered unsatisfactory or a failed proficiency test, which means in that instance, you are not competent to perform that test. So all labs test the same basic piece of cannabis or like matrix at a time. So it's as few variations as possible.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I can see how that works well for everything but cannabis, as in that cannabis can't cross state lines. We only have, 2 labs in the state that can test it. So how does that proficiency testing work when it comes to cannabis? I mean, are you shipping out of state to do those?
So the current organizations that are accredited to perform cannabis proficiency testing are usually doing one of two things. They either set up an ability to move cannabis within the state, since you can't move it across state lines. So they either produce a reference material laboratory in state. This is common in like California, where there's a lot of product and a lot of laboratories. Or they send a spiked sample. So usually that would be a hemp product that is spiked with some of the, so like maybe heavy metals or pesticides. They'll add to it and they can ship that. But for cannabinoids, usually that would be a spiked sample that the lab needs to add a certain amount of something to it, or there's different steps depending on the different states. But the accredited providers vary a little bit, but are able to perform proficiency testing in all states.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So another main component is method validation. So that is the laboratory needs to ensure that the test method they're using, the procedure essentially, is either from a trusted source. So there are validated methods from standards producing organizations, or they can write their own procedure and validate it themselves. Validation is just ensuring that the test being performed, the procedure, is stable and it's fit for use for the results they're looking to achieve. So it's within the correct range of detection limit and things like that. Then there's also measurement uncertainty is required for each test that gives a quantitative result. So that's a measure of the level of uncertainty in each test result. That's that comes from the equipment, the analysts, environmental conditions. So this is if you get 20% THC as your final result, what is your uncertainty for that? Your plus minus essentially on your reading. And you need to be able to provide that and within a reasonable range of uncertainty. So we review those budgets, they're called. The lab is also required to perform an internal audit. So this is a annual audit that the laboratory performs for all of their accredited operations. So that is their quality system. And then they're also required to do some form of witnessing of their own testing. So that is both to make sure kind of as a gap analysis internally that they're following the standard, but then also proves to us that they're looking for errors and nonconformities in their own system before we come on site and do the same. Back to kind of the equipment and actual testing, calibration is required for all equipment that can be calibrated. So that calibration we ensure is performed by an accredited 17025 accredited calibration laboratory. And that ensures that all of the equipment is traceable to standard international units. So your results are always going to be the same. You're not comparing to internal standards. And then the final main component of the standard is a management review. So that's an annual review by top management of the internal audit, staff and client feedback, resources internally, vendors, things like that. So it's a look at the entire system and looking at what needs to be improved year on year. So those are the main components. I don't know if you have any specific questions on the standard, or Warren, if you had anything to add.
No, just a quick comment that if you've seen the standard or looked, it's meant to apply to any kind of laboratory. So not just cannabis laboratories, but automotive parts or electrical products or radios, that kind of thing. And so typically those requirements are augmented by additional requirements to specifically address either your needs as a state or industry needs. And there are additional documents that have been published that build upon 17025 to specifically address those concerns for cannabis laboratories. And some states have that included in regulation or other program documents to ensure that within their state they are being assessed and accredited to the appropriate level of detail.
Yep, thank you for adding that.
So I'm trying to think. Let's just hypothetical. I'm a cultivator. I have a homogenized sample. I drop it off at 2 ISO labs, ISO certified labs. They test it at the exact same time. Is there anything that might, and they come up with different results? Would you expect that ever? And if so, what would explain the kind of difference?
Yes, that's very common. So that's also seen in proficiency testing. So even in those studies that are much more tightly controlled, you will see a variance in results between laboratories. In the cannabinoid area, one large reason for that is the standard that the laboratory uses to calibrate their equipment can be different. You are not required to use the same standard. So one might be from producer Y at 99.9% purity, and the other from producer X with 99.98% purity. And they might be using a mixed cannabinoid standard. They might be using a pure cannabinoid standard. There is no prescriptive requirement in 17025 that requires one or the other. That might be by state, that might be the case, but not in 17025. In addition to that, what I mentioned about measurement uncertainty, that has a large component as well. The equipment that the labs are using, the analyst from day to day could use a slightly, you're supposed to be using 5 milligrams of something, but they might use 5.01 one day. So there will always be variance to some extent in the test results that you're getting.
Okay.
That measurement of uncertainty, I was thinking about your 20% THC example. Do you see labs that are not accredited versus labs that are accredited, that margin kind of reduce? Generally speaking, of course, everything is, as you just laid through, everything's a little bit subjective, right? And this isn't a prescriptive standard per se in terms of methodology, but just curious if that does get better as labs get accredited and reaccredited and so on and so forth.
I haven't seen any direct data on that, but what I will say is non-accredited laboratories are not required to produce or show their measurement uncertainty. So we wouldn't even have a starting point there. If they are tracking that, that usually wouldn't be made public. And further, their the actual product that they're testing would have to be the exact same. So one cannabis from one state versus cannabis from another, you're comparing apples to oranges there. So there aren't a lot of labs that are unaccredited that would produce that data willingly, I guess is kind of my best answer for that.
That's fine. I don't know if I'm asking the right question. I'm certainly not trained in a laboratory setting, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
We have a requirement in our rules that lab, any samples that kind of, go above any of our thresholds, our testing thresholds, that those get reported to us directly by the lab. Is there like for instance on heavy metals or aspergillus or something like that? Would that negate any sort of ISO certification? No, that
No.
provision is not in conflict with anything.
Not at all. No, most states that I'm aware of that we work in have some form of reporting requirement to their cannabis board, and that's pretty typical and built into their laboratory management system.
Okay.
And part of that whole connection to the state requirements, typically when a customer comes to the laboratory, they sign some kind of a contract, and so the fact that they're doing business under your rules or regulations that require that kind of disclosure, that would be part of that agreement. So there would never be any surprise to a customer, to the laboratory, that the information would be given to the state.
Okay. And can I just ask the basics that I ask everyone that's talked to us about this so far? Just how much do you charge, generally speaking, in sort of the time frame to get this certification? If you're if you're a brand new laboratory, just installed your equipment.
Yeah, so the accreditation timeline, we usually schedule 4 to 6 months out, but that can be shortened for sure, or we can start working with you from day one, and it might take you a year to get up and running. So it's kind of on the laboratory. Once we do our initial assessment, we actually come on site and review everything. Usually within 2 months, even with issues included at the laboratory, usually accreditation is achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of pricing, on our website, we have some details of general pricing guidelines. It varies fully on your scope, is what we call it, scope of accreditation. So if you're just performing one test versus 10 tests, and where you're located for travel costs, things like that. So it varies, but we have some public facing forms for pricing on our website.
And where are you located?
So we have headquarters in New York, where ANSI, our parent company, is located, Washington, D.C., where some of our business units are, and Warren's located. And then right now I'm sitting in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but we have assessors all over the world and on the East Coast for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
And how many organizations are there like yours, like ANAB?
Yeah, ANAB accreditation bodies. Warren, you might be better suited to answer that.
Yeah, so there's a whole other process that we go through to be recognized. And so of those organizations that have been through that international review, there are 6 in the US that accredit laboratories. And of those, I would say there's 3 or 4 of us that are active in cannabis testing laboratories. We can get more information to you about that international recognition and what it means. There are other accreditations out there that are not part of that international system, but it kind of goes together with the ISO 17025 in that system.
Yeah. And so, Brent, if we were going to do this, we would do it in a rule amendment. Is that correct?
You would, yes. So I don't think this is the appropriate time for fact gathering and discussion about whether it would be something you would want to require, but no, that's not necessary to take a vote on anything today.
And it sounds like it would be kind of a 2-part, requiring the 17025 and that the accreditation service is part of this international accreditation. Yeah. Okay.
And I would just, on that point, recommend that if you choose to go that path or propose rules, that we're happy to engage with you to make sure that all the acronyms are right and the standards references are right, or point you to other states that have gotten it in their regulations correctly. Unfortunately, we see in whether it's legislation or regulation in other states where they're referencing or listing organizations that don't exist because their acronyms are being explained incorrectly, or that it's not possible for an accreditation body or a laboratory to meet those requirements. So whether it's through CANRA or another organization of regulators or some other mechanism, we're happy to ensure that you've got the information to make the best possible decision for your rule.
Great.
Thank you.
So, my main goal here is to, obviously provide the most accurate information to consumers as possible, and also to avoid this kind of lab shopping that you see in some other states. I'm curious if, in other states, and maybe you don't know the answer, but in other states, if I were a cultivator who wanted to kind of inflate my potency levels, my THC levels, I might not want to use an ISO accredited lab. Is that, I'd probably look for one that wasn't, because of all of the validations and, accreditations that an ISO lab has been through. Do you have any just thoughts about whether this would help, like if we require this in rule, whether this would help avoid any sort of incentive to lab shop from a cultivation or product manufacturer's perspective?
Yeah, I do have one thing to add, a couple things to add on that. So the 17025 standard requires impartiality in testing. And unfortunately, we have seen labs, both accredited and unaccredited, market that they will provide a certain THC potency, that they say, we will give you this potency, which is obviously not feasible. An accredited laboratory, we do go in, and that's part of that method validation component, that we and our assessors go in and look at the validation to ensure that the standards being used and the equipment being used are as appropriate as possible to minimize inflation. Now, that can still be there, and there is obviously bias always present. You will get two different results from two different labs, which will cause some lab shopping still, but that is requiring a transparent system to an impartial third party, ANAB in this case, to review that data to minimize that as much as possible.
Just to add to that quickly, the other element that comes along with the accreditation is a system for accountability. And so if the laboratory is found to be, by you or anybody else, found to be providing questionable results, there's a complaint process that they are required to have under 17025. If that doesn't resolve the issue, the complaint can come to us. And if we don't resolve it correctly, you can go to the organizations that evaluate us. And so there is, in addition to just the possibility of losing accreditation and not being able to meet a state's requirement, there's also these multiple tiers of accountability and review. And one of the things that we try and do we try and be as effective as we can in engaging with states so that they are aware of any status issues with a particular laboratory, so that you all can make the right decisions for the consumers in your state.
Well, this is I think the exact conversation I was hoping to have today. I really appreciate you guys joining. Julie or Kyle or Bryn or anyone else on the CCB side have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but thank you both. That was very instructive. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you both so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting us. And anyone on the call is welcome to reach out to me. My contact information is on our website under the Cannabis page. Warren, I'm sure, is also on there. So feel free to reach out to either of us with any follow-up questions, or if anyone on the call has questions about accreditation further, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, let's turn things over to you, Bryn, if you're okay with that.
Yes, I am. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see our report here. that working for everybody? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so here is your executive director report for this month's board meeting. We're going to start out with, there we go. We're going to start out with our public engagement summary. So last month we had, as the chair mentioned in his opening remarks, we had the second of 4 medical program study committee meetings on September 28th. The next meeting has not been scheduled yet, but when it does get scheduled, it will be posted to our events page, and the link will also be there for people to join. November is going to be a pretty busy month for outreach. We've got our mandatory licensee education and enforcement training that's happening on both Tuesday, November 7th in the evening from 5 to 7, and Thursday, November 9th from 10 to 12. So this is a 2-hour training. And just to remind folks, this is statutorily mandated licensee training. 7 VSA 865A requires that all owners, principals, or other types of controllers of a cannabis establishment complete an education seminar that the board facilitates once every 3 years in order to maintain their licensure. So these are the 2 dates that we are providing for cultivation licensees, their education seminar in order to maintain their license. So attendance and participation in one of these seminars is going to be required for the license's next renewal. And participation means that we will be tracking people's sort of monitoring that people are with us during this training seminar, with us and paying attention. So there will be some questions during the seminar. Also, next month will be an educational event. We're picking up on our educational events that we were holding the spring of this year. So we're going to pick up on those and have those once a month again. And November's educational event is going to be held on the 15th from 10 to 11 a.m. And it's going to be a training session on the amendments that were just went into effect to rules 1, 2, and 4. So those amendments went into effect on October 21st, and this sort of event is going to be essentially a walkthrough of what those amendments entailed. So that link to join that event will be posted on our event page, and I'm not sure. I don't think it's up yet, but it will be soon.
Bryn, can I stop you for just 1 second about these
Sure.
education enforcement trainings? I know you said that they're required to do them once every 3 years. This first one, it's my understanding, is mandatory for all owners and principals, and that starts the 3-year clock, after this first one. So you can't, just because you've only been licensed for a year or less or 2 years or less, it doesn't mean that you can put this off until next year.
That's right. Yes, that's a good clarification. So staff are going to be tracking the participation in these events to make sure that upon each cultivation licensee's next renewal that they attended one of these education and enforcement seminars that are happening on the 7th and the 9th.
Great, thank you.
So our next slide here is on guidance documents. I think we used to track the updates to and the new guidance documents that staff put together. So we're just going back to that, and I've included all of the guidance documents that are either new or updated since August, because I think that's when we paused reporting on these. So our municipal guidance, events and sponsorships guidance, and energy efficiency guidance have all been updated. Were updated in August. And we have an substantially updated laboratory testing requirement guidance document that reflects the new testing requirements from the updated Rule 2. And we've got links to all those guidance documents here in the report, which will be posted to the website. And then lastly, we have a product-specific sampling guidance, which is new and will be posted to the website sometime later today or tomorrow. So a significant number of new guidance that we've put out there for folks. So with that, I'll move into our adult use licensing program data. So here I'm going to start with our number of issued cultivation licenses. So this is just a straight report on the number of issued licenses that we have for all cultivation tiers. We've got a total of 392 cultivation licenses that have been issued. And this is all, like, every unique license is counted here. So it does not duplicate issued renewals. It's just every individual unique cultivation license. There are 392 of them. Of those 392, 305 are small cultivators, either indoor, mixed, or outdoor. And so that's tracking pretty consistently that about 75% of all of our licensed cultivators are small cultivators. And similarly, 274 of the 392 are either outdoor or mixed cultivators. So again, we're tracking pretty consistently that around 70% of all of our cultivation licensees are growing outside or primarily outside. So I'll move on to the next. So now we've got our number of issued manufacturing licenses by tier. So as you can see, this is pretty consistent that the majority of our manufacturers are tier 2s. At this point, we are up to 9 tier 3 manufacturers. Here's the number of retailers, testing labs, wholesalers, and integrated licensees. So we're up to 68 licensed retailers at this point. And I think that our next slide shows the initial applications that are in process. So you can see how many of each type of license are in the queue to join our existing batch of licensees. So these are all new applications for a new license that are currently being processed by our licensing staff. So at this point, we've got 12 retail applications in the queue, 22 indoor tier 1 cultivation license applications in the queue, and 8 tier 2 manufacturers. Those are the biggest of this bunch here. And as you all know, those 3, the tier 1, indoor, the retail, and the tier 2 manufacturers are all, are 3 of the board's most sought after license types. So that is pretty consistent that would be the group that is in the queue to come before the board for approval.
Thank you for this. I asked for this because as we're talking about cultivation and closing cultivation licenses, I think my colleagues and I would probably need to start thinking about what that looks like for the rest of the supply chain. What does that mean for how many retailers we need and how many manufacturers and so on and so forth? So this is very helpful for that. Thank you.
Bryn, just for a point of clarification, from when we say in the queue, does that mean somebody has just created a bare bones application or actually hit the submit button? Or
yeah, that's a great clarification. These people have actually submitted. So okay. They are somewhere in the process between having submitted their draft application and being sort of in the final stages of review before they get to the board for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, and the next slide here, now we're looking at renewals. So we're moving away from our sort of initial license applicants to the number of cultivation renewals that we've got by type and tier. So these are the straight numbers of renewals that we've issued. So this is not an additional, these are not in addition to the issued licenses that you saw in the first couple of slides in this section of the report. These are just sort of pulling from that group of numbers the number of renewals that have issued at this point. And as I was noting earlier, like the numbers here are tracking consistently with the numbers that we have for initial issuances. So it looks like on the whole, folks are tending to renew and stick with our same tier, as opposed to moving up. Our sort of data analysis group are working on getting a report pulled that the board can look at to see the number of folks that are moving up a tier, or moving down a tier for that matter. But at this point, we can just say that when we're looking at these numbers, they're tracking pretty consistently with the original tier that was issued for our cultivation folks. And then we've got the number of other renewals by type and tier. So these are just, you can see that our renewals are sort of trickling in for all of our other license types. And the board will remember well that we opened these application windows sort of later in the year. So this is consistent. These numbers being small is not alarming, because this is just the time when these types of licenses are up for renewal. And then this is the same data that you looked at before, except for renewals. So these are our renewal applications that are in process. So the last couple of slides were our issued renewals, and then this gives you a sense of who is in the door being reviewed for their license renewal. We've got 114 license renewals that are currently in process, and you can see the big numbers track consistently with what our big popular license types are: the indoor, outdoor, and mixed tier 1s, and the retailers, and the tier 2 manufacturers. Okay, next is our retail locations areas of density slide. So these are all of our municipalities or locations that have 3 or more retailers that we track. So you can see Burlington has 9 issued with 3 in the queue at this point. And then Morrisville is next with 4 licensed retailers.
All right.
And one note, I think based on a comment at the last board meeting, Montpelier, so these numbers reflect retailers, standalone retail licenses, and the retail portion of an integrated license, which accounts for the Montpelier number there. And
Was there
not a medical dispensary that's kind of standalone.
Right.
Was there a comment or a question in the last meeting as well about like Bennington? There being more than one in Bennington?
Yes, and I think that there is a medical dispensary that we wouldn't count because we're talking about adult use stores.
I see.
Okay.
So this density slide, I asked for it a while back so that new prospective retailers can kind of see what their likely competition is, generally speaking. I mean, the thing that I would love to see, 9 retailers in Burlington, 3 more in the queue, 0 in South Burlington, 0 in Williston, and the only reason for that is they haven't opted in. But I don't think that they're actually opposed to cannabis retail. So anyone who is a prospective retailer, I would encourage anyone to start thinking about getting a petition together to open, get that question on the ballot for town meeting day, or however kind of the local municipality asks those questions of their voters.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Great
All
point.
right.
Sorry.
No, I know. It always, that opt-in, opt-out always rubbed me the wrong way, but obviously it's statutory and not something that we have much control over.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your map this is sort of your areas of density, but in map format. And all of those blue pins are our licensed retail establishments, and the red pins are the retail applicants that are in the queue. So just to give you a sense of how the retail market is growing. And then we've got full, this is our sort of zoom in on the retail locations in Burlington. This doesn't include any folks that are in the queue. This just includes our issued retail licenses. Okay, and now we've got the list of our, so the next 2 slides are the list of our licensees that have confirmed with CCB staff that they are not going to be renewing. So this information is up to date as of October 20th. So it's this slide and the next slide. And oops, just go back. And so we've got 21 in total licensees that have indicated that they won't be renewing their license. And just of that 21, 5 of them are economic empowerment status, 2 are social equity status. 20 of them are cultivators and 1 is a wholesaler. And of that 21, 14, of the 20 cultivation licensees, 14 are tier 1 cultivators. So to give you a sort of sense of who it is that is not renewing, those are the numbers. And then we do have some data. We have some initial data that sets out the reasons for folks deciding to relinquish their license. So we've got, this is really a subset. So the next 2 slides provide data on the reasons people are providing for why they are not going to renew their license. And it's a subset of that 21 folks. So we've been conducting sort of exit interviews of our licensees that have decided to relinquish their license. And the data on the next couple of slides reflects, I think, 14 interviews. And as you'll see from the numbers, not everybody answers every question. So subset of a subset of data here that will become more robust as we conduct more of these interviews. So one of the questions in the interview is, can you please describe the reasons for relinquishing your license? And I know that the colors are a little tricky to parse out here, but on this first slide, we've got the bulk of the reason there, that the number 10 that reflects almost half is other. So I'm sorry, it's not, it's personal. Personal reasons are the reasons described for why folks are relinquishing their license. The second largest number, which is 4, is other reasons. And then that blue 3 is site issues. And then the sort of lighter color green, which is 2, is a lack of financial resources. And then those scattered ones are unmet labor requirements, application or licensing issues, and marketing and advertising difficulties. Nobody indicated that market access was a reason for relinquishing their license. So just under half cited the major reason for relinquishing their license was a personal one. And the next slide indicates answers to sort of a similar question, but related. What are the factors that contributed to your decision to relinquish your license? And here's where we didn't get as much response from folks, but the responses that we did get, that 5, the majority, was other. Other reason. We did not capture the reason why they relinquished their license within this menu of options here. But that 2, the big blue 2, and the 1 black are costs associated with insurance and costs associated with banking. So 2 folks indicated that it was the insurance costs that led them to relinquish their license, and 1 indicated it was the banking costs. So the other factors that were not chosen among this subset of people who responded were lack of resources, ability to comply with statutes and regulations, ability to hire and retain employees, and the costs associated with the application and licensing process. So take this for what it's worth, since it's a pretty limited subset of answers. But as I mentioned before, we will continue to conduct these interviews with folks that are not renewing their license to better understand what's leading them to relinquish their license. Any questions about that before I move on? I think I'm moving into canopy information after this.
I just have a question about how people select these options. Can they select multiple options, or do they have to select like the one that is the most true kind of
Nope,
question?
they can
Okay.
select multiple.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for doing this work, Brent.
Well, I'm going to thank my team for doing this work. Yeah, the compliance agents have been conducting these interviews for the most part. So it's thanks goes to them.
Yeah, this is very helpful.
Okay, so the next slide is our license canopy capacity wall chart. So again, I'm going to just reiterate the same thing I always say, which is that these numbers reflect all of our issued licenses, not approved licenses. So it includes canopy size of all of our issued licenses as of October 10th. Nope, October 20th. So this, you can see the numbers. I'm just going to tell you about the sort of increase since August, since that's when we started tracking canopy capacity in this way. Represents a 25,000 square foot increase in outdoor capacity between August and October, and a 14,000 square foot increase in indoor capacity since August. So a little bit of growth in both indoor and outdoor in the last 2 months. And our next slide is our canopy capacity versus utilization tracker. So this is pretty consistent. I actually think it's dropped a little bit since the last board meeting. We're around 43% utilization of indoor canopy capacity right now, and around 75% of our outdoor canopy utilization right now. So I think that represents just a small decrease in our utilization numbers. And just a reminder that that indoor utilization number, I think, is probably disproportionately low given the time of year, since many of our mixed cultivators aren't beginning their indoor grow until their outdoor season is complete.
Is that utilization number, is that utilization for flowering canopy, or is that for all live plant production?
It's all live plant production. It's not just flowering.
Yep. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I'll move on to our compliance data next. So we start with our advertising data. I'm going to stop updating this slide every month once we hit that November 15th mark, I think, since this data is really changes very incrementally. And when you look at it month to month, we'll probably start looking at it just quarterly after this. But we've got 158 total advertising submissions since we started reviewing potential advertisements back in November of last year. Our approval numbers are now at 58%, denials are at 40%, and then we've got a 2% partial approval. That's new. And that really reflects our, efforts with folks who are submitting proposed advertisements to us, to work with them to help them understand what they need to sort of achieve with their proposed advertisement in order to ensure that it is compliant with the advertising statute. So our reasons for denial are listed there. Again, always the vast majority of the folks who get denied on their proposed advertisement are because they don't provide data or sufficient data to reassure our staff that the advertising platform that they're using meets that 15% youth audience composition threshold. And then the second most common reason for denial is that the advertisement is missing the health warning, which is required to be included in all advertisements. And then it goes down from there. So insufficient information, advertises prizes or giveaways, which is prohibited by the statute. And really it's a small number that are denied for appealing to children. It's only 5%. And as we note there can be multiple reasons why an ad is denied.
So I know that no one on our staff particularly likes having to pre-approve advertisements, but to me, this slide indicates that we would be bringing compliance actions against 40% of the people that have submitted advertisements if it wasn't for pre-approval. So, I think it's just an important piece here that we would have to be, fining people, issuing penalties to 40% of 158 advertisements. It's a hoop that everyone has to jump through, but I feel like in the end it's saving people money. But and then if you don't like the advertising statutes, that's not really something we have control over.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with your comment 100%. I think it ultimately saves us time, and it is certainly saving licensees the costs of administrative penalties. And also, I do think it is an opportunity for our staff. It's just one of the many places that our staff are really working with licensees to help them understand what the statute means, and how we are interpreting it and how we are enforcing it. There's quite a bit of back and forth that goes on between our advertising crew and folks that are proposing their advertisements.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go on to our compliance summary here. So in the last month, we've received 20 new complaints from both our online complaint portal on our website, and from our own staff. We've got resulting 9 new investigations that have begun since the last board meeting. A summary of the rationale for those investigations is right there. We've got online sales, unauthorized sales, operation in multiple locations, and products exceeding potency limits are all some of the investigations that have begun since the last board meeting. And compliance agents have observed product destruction at 2 operating sites since the last board meeting.
And I know the answer to this, I think, but we take every complaint seriously, and it's just only 9 of the 20 led to the need for an investigation.
Yes, that's correct. The fact that a complaint is being investigated indicates that it needs investigation in order to determine whether or not the complaint is legitimate. Many of these complaints are resolved with some education between from our compliance team out in the field. So that does not at all indicate that we are only responding to 9 of those 20 complaints.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our medical program data. And this is just the same slide showing the decrease in the number of caregivers and registered patients. This data is current as of October 20th. And this close-up slide shows that we had another decrease since the last board meeting. In October, we went from 155 to 141 caregivers, so that's a loss of 14. And we went from 3,172 to 3,088 patients in October, so that's a loss of 84 patients in the last month.
The survey that's gone out has questions specifically about where people obtain their medical cannabis, right? Whether it's through a caregiver, whether or not they are purchasing it from retail location or a dispensary. I think that is in that survey, correct? So it might help us understand why these numbers are changing.
Yes, that question is in the survey, and just one point of clarification is that the survey hasn't actually been released yet. It will be going out this week, but it hasn't gone out just yet. But that is, as when it does go out, it will be we will make sure to update our website that it's gone out to and encourage folks to respond to it. But yes, it does ask that question. I'm going to move on to our recommendations unless anybody has any other questions. Okay, so the next several slides are staff recommendations for board considerations for licensure. All of the applicants that are listed on the next 3 slides, I think, have demonstrated that they are in compliance with all the requirements for their license that are contained in board rule and in statute. So the first slide is staff recommendations for initial licensure. So we've got Stash Farm applying for an indoor tier 1 cultivation license, Red Clover Select applying for a wholesale license, Proper Cannabis Vermont applying for an indoor tier 1 cultivation license, Bogbrook Botanicals indoor tier 1 cultivation license, Craft Cannabis Company applying for a retail license, Sunset Lake Cannabis applying for a retail license, Sawyer Dog Retail applying for a retail license, Craft Cannabis of Vermont applying for a tier 2 manufacturing license, Ridgetop Farm applying for a tier 1 manufacturing license, and Lost Bittern Flower applying for an indoor tier 1 cultivation license. And then the next 2 slides are staff recommendations for license renewal. So these are all existing licensees that are in compliance with all of the requirements for maintaining a license, both in board rule and in statute. And staff is recommending license renewal for this group of folks. That is the end of my presentation.
Thanks, Bryn. Any questions for Bryn?
Nope. Thank you, Bryn.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the staff recommendations?
I move that the board accept each of the recommendations as presented to us by staff in this meeting.
I will second.
Great. Any further discussion?
Nope.
All right.
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. All right. We're a little behind schedule, but that's all right. I think we had some good conversations today. I will open the public comment window. And just if you join via the video link, please raise your virtual hand to comment. Once we've made it through those, we'll move to the folks that join via phone. And Nellie, if you want to help us with the order.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today?
Fine, thanks.
Fine. My name is John, and Joe is here with me. I represent Joe. He's one of my clients, and we submitted his application on his final. He had some hiccups with the permit process to the state on other things on the 6th of this month, and we got his CO 2 months ago, roughly, and it was changed to the 11th that it was submitted, and our question is, we're just questioning why he didn't appear on this agenda to be approved as an initial licensee. If there's a reason,
I don't generally do question and answer during public comment, but you know, do you mind mentioning the name of the business?
No, Mr. Chair. It's 802-420, and their DBA is Roland 20s, and they're located in Rockingham.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize for that. We've been trying to get answers through commentary back and forth with the full-time staff, and they've been doing a great job of trying to answer the questions. So we're looking at next steps. If we're not here, how long does he have to wait? Because we're just waiting for the Cannabis board to come down and inspect. He's all ready to go.
Okay. Well, I think this is a conversation that could happen offline with our compliance and our licensing staff. So I'm just going to push it to there because I don't have an answer for you right now. The board, just so you know, it doesn't get involved in the kind of pre-approval stage of licensure.
I understand. Yeah, thank you. I just that's all I had for you. And another question, real quick, maybe it's going to come up, but the tier 5 and the 4 are those going to be sunsetted forever? And those who have them, will they not be able to renew that license? Will that be the moving forward opinion of the board?
Again, this isn't a question and answer session, but I will
Oops.
comment window.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I lost you. I don't know if it was on my end or yours, but I understand. I'll hold my commentary for now on things, and maybe we can collaborate moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Nellie, this is BJ. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Good.
Yep.
Thank you for taking my call. Just a couple thoughts. One is regarding the survey. I'd certainly like to see the questionnaire for that. Assume that's on the website, and I'll just proceed assuming that the questionnaire is visible on the website before it's fielded. The second has to do with the chair's statement that there's an accurate demand model. I assume he's referring to the VSS model. Just wanted to point out that that is partially true, depending on whether or not he is considering the capture rate. That's the legacy capture rate, at what rate that is. If he's considering that or not, would have a profound impact on the capacity that's necessary to meet demand, whether or not the legacy capacity rate is being realized or not. So just a couple comments for your thoughts, and look forward to seeing something with regard to an answer to those, or maybe something on the website that responds to those comments. Thank you, Nellie.
BJ, can I, before you go?
I'm going to demute. I'm going to mute myself.
Well, BJ, before you do that, can I just ask, are you, well, the survey that I think you're referring to is for medical patients and will be emailed to medical patients and caregivers.
Oh, okay. Well, that's one good clarification. I was wondering whether that is to actual cannabis consumers, or these are residents of Vermont over 21. One thing that I might suggest is that you understand better about where the consumer is coming from and interview residents of Vermont over 21 and determining what their thoughts are on the program. So that's just a thought there.
Gotcha. Thanks, BJ.
Thanks, Nellie.
Kevin Driscoll, are you there?
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make the comment that that medical survey was sent out yesterday. I'm a medical patient, and I had received an email yesterday for that. So it looks like that's already been published.
Oh, great. Thanks for that, Kevin.
I got that update right after I said the wrong thing. So glad it went out.
Hi there, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
So I'm just like to comment on all principals having to get background checks and the education seminars when it comes to renewals. It just doesn't feel like my brother who lives out of state and owns 1% of my company has to go through this, and we have to pay for it all. It's really expensive, and it just doesn't seem necessary. It feels like we could maybe sign an affidavit that all principals have, not been arrested or charged with anything in the last year, and then avoid all those fees and still get to the same place. That's all. Thank you. Hopefully everybody's having a good day.
All right. Thanks, Tito. Anyone else for a public comment that joined via the link, feel free to just raise your virtual hand. And I see two people that have joined via phone. If either of you would like to make a public comment, you can unmute yourself by hitting *6 on your phone.
Hi, Rob from Tiernan Edibles. With the new testing requirements that are going into place, I know that as a manufacturer, I have a lot of questions about them. The stuff that was sent out before is really rather vague about it. So I'm just hoping that we can get some clarification on a few things. For example, what about products that are already in registration? Do we have to start this new testing for them? There's the every 3 months thing. When does that start? When do they go into effect? All that kind of stuff. So I'm just hoping we can kind of get clarification on a lot of that.
Great. Yeah, I think for now, talk to your compliance agent. They're all on the same page with respect to that. But it does sound to me like this might be a good topic for one of our just education seminars, just around this testing guidance.
It
Rob, there is
will
some.
be.
Huh?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just gonna say it will be. That's the one, the following education seminar.
I think some of your requested guidance, Rob, is going to come in the form of the sampling guidance, which should be released in the coming days, especially around homogeneity testing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I mean, yeah, it's just, I know with testing in general, there has been a bit of confusion. So great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I do not expect a response, but our license was up for renewal in the agenda, and I did not see it on the list that was displayed. So if somebody could get back to me on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. And Anna, you're talking about for Mountain Girl?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Sarah? Yeah, sorry.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to make a comment on an observation I've made on some labeling lately. I know that we have restrictions on things being kid-friendly, and I noticed a certain label had things on it that seemed a bit kid-friendly to me, but had been approved. And I just was surprised by it, so I actually reached out to the manufacturer and asked about their label, and they told me that the reason it was approved is because it was cute and didn't have human eyes. And I just have heard of other companies having labels be not approved because of their possible appeal to children, and I just wanted to make a comment on that observation because I'm hoping to see a little more consistency in those approvals going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I think we actually have the matrix that we use to evaluate all advertisements available on our website.
That's
Chipper,
correct.
do you
It's
have
in
your
the guidance
hand raised?
section.
I do, and I'm not a member of the public. So full disclosure, I'm the compliance agent for Southern Vermont. Someone beats me to it. There are, in fact, 3 licensed retail cannabis establishments in Brattleboro, 2 in Wilmington, and 2 in Bennington. In addition, there's a medical in Bennington as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chipper. Anyone else for public comment? Raise your virtual hand. Looks like we don't have anyone left on the phone. Okay, I will close the public comment window. Emailed me saying that Mountain Girl retail was on the approval list for renewal. So I think that that's squared away, but we'll be in touch if that's not the case. And then on the tier 4 and 5 closure, I mean, for now we didn't put an end date on when that application type might open for, or when it might open again, or when the kind of closure would expire. You know, any cannabis board, whether it's the 3 of us or some future board, can reopen license types at kind of after a vote. So, you know, it could happen at any time. You know, the way that I see this working is that people that have those existing licenses can renew at, you know, if you are a tier 4 or 5 indoor outdoor mixed, you can renew at that level. This would be the closures for new applications. And Julie, Kyle, feel free to kind of intervene if you were thinking something different.
No, I think that was the intent, and the motion for the tier 4 specifically said new.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I said the word new for the 4 and 5, but that was the intent definitely for that one at least.
Yep, that's my understanding too.
Great. Okay. Anything else that I missed that should be addressed?
I don't
No.
think so.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for noting that the medical survey went out. Again, it went out to patients and caregivers. It has a lot of very critical questions in there that the board would like to know. You know, it takes about no more than 10 minutes to complete. If you can complete it, that we really appreciate the input, because it really will help improve the quality, the accessibility, and the kind of types of products that are available in the medical program. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.